If I asked your head of customer success what customers are trying to achieve this year, would they respond with an outcome or a tactic? Because when customer goals aren't tied to an outcome that drives business value, then teams default to activity. And activity does not renew, but outcomes do. By the end of this video, you'll know how to spot if this is an issue in your business, understand what will change for you in your business once this is fixed, and have a few structural shifts on how to close the gap. I'm Erin, and I run Lakeshore Success Strategies. We advise B2B SaaS companies as they build, scale, or fix their post-sale programs. So let's start with how to know if this is happening in your business. Here's the simplest test. Sit in on a QBR. If the majority of the conversation is about usage, feature adoption, tickets closed, or trainings completed, you don't have a customer goal. You have activity reporting. And when you don't have a customer goal, you're going to see longer onboardings. You're going to have trouble getting adoption. And then your advocacy, if it exists, is going to be stuck at the bottom levels of the organization with renewal and expansion as an afterthought. And when those goals aren't structurally defined, renewals become storytelling exercises instead of business reviews. The cost of this isn't philosophical, it's financial. Your team spends the year onboarding, training, driving adoption, and running QBRs. And then 60 days before renewal, maybe 90, they scramble to try and prove value retroactively. That's why renewals are hard. That's why churn is surprising. That's why expansion is inconsistent. Because you're trying to defend value that was never clearly defined in the first place. Now, here's what changes when customer goals are clearly defined in business value. QBRs are no longer updates, but they're shared progress reports about how we're doing against a shared business objective. Your CSMs aren't preparing slides about activity, but rather providing evidence about impact. Renewals get easier, and it's not because the team naturally becomes better negotiators, but because the value conversation has been happening all year. Expansion is logical. Once a customer achieves a measurable outcome, the next conversation is simply, what's the next objective we solve together? Internally, behavior shifts too. The teams prioritize differently, they identify risk earlier, and they escalate differently. Because now they're managing a number as opposed to a checklist. When goals are tied to value, it's no longer subjective. And when value isn't subjective, revenue becomes more predictable. So what does a real customer goal actually look like? It has 3 non-negotiables. So first, it ties directly to company value. And by company value, I mean one of 2 things, either revenue growth or profit growth. Profit growth can include risk mitigation, it can include cost reduction, but those are the 2 that it has to tie to, one or the other, or both. If the outcome doesn't actually impact either of those 2, it's not strategic. Increasing usage doesn't drive top-line revenue. Improving engagement isn't helping profit, right? Those might be inputs, but company value means the business either makes money or spends less money. If you cannot draw a straight line from your solution to one of those 2, then the goal isn't anchored deeply enough. Secondly, that goal has to align with senior leadership. If it does not matter to the people who actually own a number and a budget, then when they come to review your next renewal, it's easy to strike it off the budget. So you do need to make sure that it truly aligns to what that top level is trying to achieve. And then finally, it has to be specifically defined. So let's take a look at a few examples. These are from our customer base, but obviously I'm not quoting any unique customer. So a few things we hear. 1, if we just increase our monthly active users by 50%, we're going to get the renewals we need this year. What we actually need to think about is the art of war. And in case you haven't read that, it says that tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Same thing here. Usage does not equal value. So what you need to do instead is a deeper dive on what will the company do with that increased usage. Does it help them reduce risk? Does it help them onboard new employees faster, which means a quicker time to ramp and lower cost, right? Those are some of the things that can really impact a bottom line. Secondly, the head of marketing wants to increase revenue, which is great, but if there's no specificity and no actual goalpost, then you're not going to be able to come back in a year and say, we helped you achieve your goal. So here it's really easy. A, get a number or a ballpark of what that revenue increase needs to look like, and B, define the outcome. If our head of marketing can increase revenue by 1.5 times, then it will allow for X. That really helps you have a very compelling story and narrative to measure and come back to. And then finally, we have customers with no goals. And when there are no goals, what often happens to their business, in fact, always happens to their business, they get into pricing and bidding wars with their competitors. It becomes a feature versus a feature battle. And ultimately, they have to define goals. So that's the most work to do if you're sitting in bucket 3 over here. The good news is this work does not require an overhaul. It doesn't require significant investment. It simply requires a shift and discipline. So at minimum, every top account should have one clearly documented objective that ties to company value, is aligned with senior leadership, and is specifically defined with a metric and a timeline. 1, not 10. If your team cannot articulate that objective in one sentence and tie it to a number, then you don't have a value strategy. You have activity. And activity doesn't renew, but outcomes do. Because the companies that scale predictably don't manage activity. They manage customer impact that ties to business value. So if you want renewals to start to feel easier, then you have to start earlier with one clearly defined goal. Everything else compounds from there. I'm Erin Stabi from Lakeshore Success, and I'll see you in the next one.